Hello and welcome to the sixth video in the PowerShell scripting series. In this video we'll cover while loops, do a couple basic PowerPoint slides on the syntax and some basic information. Then we'll do a few tutorial demos with accepting user input and filtering based on characters or a name. If you find this helpful, go ahead and give it a like. If you would like to see more content from us in the future, feel free to subscribe, and I hope this helps. Thanks for watching. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the PowerPoints. Go ahead and discuss while loops from the Microsoft About Loop while page, about while, I should say. A while loop will run as long as the code as the conditional test evaluates to true. So when we run it, as long as it's true, it'll keep iterating, and once it evaluates to false, which we'll see, we'll go ahead and hop out of it and do some kind of statement. While loops are easier to construct than a traditional for loop. They're used when we don't know or we can't determine how many times the loop will need to iterate. So specifically, I've used them in the past for user input in scripts. If we don't want particular values, or we just want to kind of predefine what the input should look like, we can go ahead and use while loops for that. It's important to make sure that your loop will eventually evaluate to false and exit in order to avoid a continuous loop. They can eat resources and cause big problems, especially for systems that are already kind of resource starved. An endless loop can occur in any of the constructs, however, they are typically easiest to write in a while loop. For our demonstration, we'll create a simple loop, check for user input with invalid characters, combine our loop with a simple if statement to perform different pieces of code based on the input, based on whatever comes in. And the while loop syntax in PowerShell is very much similar to that of the other C languages with the brackets, and we'll demonstrate that here in just a moment. Python, being a white space oriented language, does not have those. Let me kind of clear this on up. There we go. So the standard syntax, a typical while loop will start like a for loop, and it'll have the parentheses. We'll take a value and we will compare it to something. In this case, we're going to see if it is less than 5, and we'll run whatever is in between these particular brackets here. The next one down, again, same thing with the while loop, and this time we're going to say while the value matches these characters specifically, not the bracket, that just is a bordering defining character, as we'll see an example of in the demos. And then while this code does match this, while whatever the user input is does match that, it will be we'll write whatever's in here, and then eventually we'll escape. And that is basically the syntax and the while loop in a nutshell. We'll go ahead and take a look at a few demos and see what's going on with the while loops. Okay, moving into the demo, we will need to open up PowerShell and go ahead and navigate to the directory we'll be working in, which is off of the desktop and the PowerShell folder. We can run code space dot, and it'll open up VS Code, and from that directory, so just any files we create from here will be created in that directory. You can go ahead and get started. We'll close out this other window. You can't left or right click and create a file, so we'll just press Control S and move to select a PowerShell file. PS1 is the file type we want. We'll just name this while loops.ps1. Go ahead and save that, and that'll automatically provide some syntax highlighting for us. So we'll go ahead and create a variable called user or uInput, and close this other window or this little message out here. And then we'll go ahead and set that equal to the value of read host, which is a commandlet for getting user input, and you can pass it a prompt parameter, and that'll be what we want to spit out. That'll say please enter a username. So let's say we wanted to get a username to change their password or create them in the directory. So we'll say while uInput match, and then this is actually incorrect, and we'll see the error message that goes along with it and how to fix that. But we go ahead and close out the rest of our condition and open the script blocks. Let me go ahead and increase the size here. We can do control plus, control equals, and that'll also zoom this in like this. But we can go ahead and perform some code while we're inside of our loop. So while the input matches a star, let's say we don't want that. Maybe this is a delete function and we don't want to delete everything, which is what a star is kind of stands for it all. So we can go ahead and write host and say you have entered invalid characters. Please enter a valid name, username. Yeah, username. And we go ahead and run our check again. But first, we go ahead and create a couple of empty lines. This will help space out our input. We actually needed to add one inside here, and it didn't, but we can go ahead and grab our check, and then it'll prompt us again. Should have put a right host, an empty space, an empty line there between each one, but we'll see how that goes here in a second. So with this, we'll grab the input, run it through our while construct here. And while it matches this particular character, we'll prompt that they did not put in the correct input and prompt for an actual username. We can just go ahead and run our script from the same directory, running, and it'll ask us to enter a username. If we enter star, we'll see the error, and what ends up happening here is that the quantifier, so it can't parse that. We need to put brackets around it, and in the presentation we did put brackets around it, but I forgot there and I decided to leave it in to show how we would get around it. I ended up just going back to some code I had written earlier this year, and it looks a little bit like this. So we'll just create a variable called username, do the same thing, enter the name of user to unlock. This was an unlock user and AD script. And we just do the same thing while the variable username matches. And in this one, there's a little bit more. You can actually put a lot of things. This is called a regular expression. But you can put a lot of different things in here. Basically, this is just saying if it matches any of these characters, the $sign over through the closing parenthesis, or the username length is equal to 0, or the username equals an empty space, then we'll just prompt for a actual valid input, and that's kind of what we needed to do here. What we'll do in just a moment is putting the brackets in as we should. We can basically put anything inside of here. We can specify a range by saying something like lowercase a through lowercase z. But with that saved, we can go ahead and run, and it'll prompt us again for a username, and now we'll see we get the invalid characters. And if we continue to enter that particular character, no matter how many times we enter it, if we enter it for 1,000,000 entries, but the moment we enter a regular entry or a valid entry, it's going to pop out of that loop. Now what can we do with that? We can go ahead and specify a simple if statement that does something based on that input. If it's not if it is not an asterisk. So we'll say if you input equal or match in this case. In other languages, you may put a, well, yeah, let's just do that. Change that out to match and not equal here. And we'll say if the name is equal to Bob, and then we'll just write the output, you have entered the name Bob. And we'll put an else if statement. We can give this another condition where we say if you input is something else. And here is where I determine that this should be match and not equals. Other languages you might have like a single or double equal sign there. And we can basically do the same thing. We'll just another output here that you have entered the name Jill. Alright. And we can actually specify by passing the variable back out. Then we can come on down and add one more else statement. And we don't need to pass this any kind of condition. This is just going to say if it doesn't meet whatever was before it, then we're going to say something else. And we'll specify a different string here so we can kind of see that in action. And this is just a pretty simple if construct. It's just going to output the command or the string with the variable. So still we make sure that the initial case worked. Now we see that if we enter Bob, it'll tell us that we have entered his name. And if we run it again and say Aaron, it'll tell us because that doesn't match either. That doesn't match the condition that we had already set in the previous if statement. So that triggers the final you. So it just says the name instead of you have entered the name, and that'll be Jill because that's the only name that will trigger that. So as we can see, pretty basic, but while loops can be very powerful. This is just one simple example on how we can use them, but we gotta remember to go ahead and throw those brackets around that. We want to have those in single quotes, and again we could say basically any characters we want if we didn't want to have these particular characters. And again, like I said, we can put a range in there. Capital A through capital Z will not allow any uppercase characters from A to Z or Z. But we can basically, like the other one did, and we can add more to these. We can say or and at the end of this statement and kind of declare more. There's a lot that can be done with these, but if we add now any of these, actually I did not add the I didn't add the @ symbol to the list of characters. So now if we save and run our script again, put an @ symbol in there, it'll show us as an invalid character. That is pretty much it for the while loops. I hope you found this helpful, and we'll see you in the next video.